Hello and welcome to DevSecTalks. I'm your host, Ashley Ward, and today I'm joined by Jen Miller-Osborn, Deputy Director of Threat Intelligence at Unit 42. Unit 42 is the premier threat intelligence and security consulting organization that researches and collects information about unknown threats. In today's episode, we'll sit down with Jen to learn all about ransomware, the motives behind this type of cyber attack, and the measures individuals and companies can take to protect themselves. Let's get started. Hello all and welcome to DevSecTalks. I'm your host, Ashley Ward. And joining me today is someone, actually it was quite coincidental. If you didn't know with my accent, I'm based in Scotland and I was reading the BBC News recently. And there, lo and behold, I see Jen and she's commented on BBC News in an article. And I went, this is fantastic. I work with Jen. So Jen, would you please introduce yourself and tell us what you do?
I am Jen Miller-Osborn. I'm the Deputy Director of Threat Intelligence here with Unit 42.
This is very cool. And as I say, it was actually around a ransomware attack that occurred. And we don't need to go into the details of that specific organization that was hit. But ransomware, very quickly for everybody, I think everyone assumes they know exactly what it is. In a nutshell, what does ransomware mean for an organization?
It is malicious software that will encrypt all of the data on a given device, rendering it unusable.
Okay. All right. And so then, and people are usually doing this, I would presume, financially motivated to try and extort some money out of people.
Absolutely. It's all financially motivated.
Who are the organizations that are kind of doing this? Is it small, me and my with my hoodie on and my laptop? Who's doing this?
It's everyone like that, people that aren't particularly sophisticated, all the way up through, unfortunately now, people that are actually able to develop their own malware and continue evolving and making it better. So it's gone from something that was small and not necessarily a big problem for a lot of people. 5 years ago, the average ransom was about $500 that people were paying. But today, the average ransom that people are paying based on the data that we have at Palo Alto Networks is about $500,000. And the highest ransom we've seen that was paid so far that we know of was $20 million. So it's really become this massive criminal business model.
Absolutely. And that's insane. And it does come up in the news quite often. Are these types of, are people being, specific organizations being targeted, or is it sort of a widespread, just, throw out there and see what gets hit?
They're targeting organizations that have the most pressure to pay and the least tolerance for downtime. So there's a lot of focus on healthcare in particular, because, they need their systems to be out to treat patients. Potentially people's lives are at risk, and the attackers recognize that, and they're taking advantage of that by focusing on organizations like hospitals.
How do you go about researching that? Are you looking at reported cases? Are you going through the news? Talk us through some of that.
So we follow open source reporting as well, and that includes these dark websites where some of the groups are starting to publish when they've compromised someone or when they've allegedly compromised someone. So we're following those as well. One of the complications with ransomware, especially ransomware as a service, which is what we're seeing a lot of the groups move to, is that you have multiple disparate people or disparate groups carrying out attacks, but they're all using the same ransomware and the same infrastructure. So it can be difficult to tease out, which one is this affiliate versus what is the other affiliate that's also using this versus what the developers are doing, because they still do attacks on their own. They just also rent out essentially their infrastructure and their tools because it's an easy way to make more money. They don't have to do literally anything. They just let someone else use it. They carry out their own attacks. They take, 20 to 30% of the profit off of it.
Presumably then, as it's part of Unit 42, I know that Unit 42 do lots and lots of research into this. There must be some pushback then. Do you see that as from an organizational point of view that, you're exposing what people are doing ultimately and trying to make the world safer? So how does that work? How do you feel about that?
There's more effort happening now, especially with law enforcement and government, that's been recognized that this is such a large global problem and that there's so much money involved. There's very little very little reason for criminals to stop doing it right now, right? They're not necessarily going to jail. They're not necessarily having anything happen. They're just becoming millionaires. So we're seeing more of a focus with governments and law enforcement internationally, recognizing that this is such a large problem to go after these people that are conducting the attacks and actually start, sanctioning organizations if that's the only thing we can do, or going after people and actually arresting them.
Is it mostly, would you say, from your research, is it really just those large organizations in healthcare, or people who, you'd mentioned, who can't afford the downtime? So for a small or medium-sized organization, is it kind of, it doesn't affect me yet? Is it something that might be coming? Where do you think there from the size of organizations?
So smaller organizations can still be affected by this. We're seeing some of the larger, more organized, if you want to call them that, groups doing research in advance of before they're compromising these people. So they're figuring out what they can pay, essentially, and they're looking for organizations that can pay a lot of money. But that is not what all of them are doing. There's plenty of other people in this space who are doing more opportunistic targeting, or hitting a lot of the mid-sized to smaller businesses, because they have less protections in place. Usually they don't have a big budget, for cybersecurity. And the attackers recognize that as well. And they take advantage of it. Yeah, we can't get $1 million out of one organization, but we can get, $1,000 out of 1,000 organizations pretty easily. And still, it scales up to be a lot of money, and it flies under the radar because they're not going after healthcare. They're not going after pipelines or critical infrastructure. So they're not likely to become big in the news. Kind of groups are well known, which lets them continue operating and continue making money, because they're viewed, more as a nuisance, because it's not, headline grabbing. We want $70 million for a decryptor kind of thing.
Do you see that there's like overspill, like maybe one organization is specifically attacked, but due to, I don't know, the nature of the internet connectivity, that it spills out into other organizations, or things, how's that evolving? Do you know?
That's what we saw in a potential shift with the recent Kaseya attack that REvil did, where instead of compromising Kaseya and holding them to ransom, and that's typically what they would have done, they realized they had a 0-day for some software that the company produces, and the servers for those, a lot of them have to be internet accessible. So they were able to use that 0-day against multiple servers to get into that. And then those servers had MSP clients. So once they were into the software itself, they were able to push ransomware to those clients, taking advantage of that trusted relationship. So it's not really a true supply chain style attack, but I've been calling it supply chain adjacent. But it allowed them that same ridiculous spread of potential victims, because they were able to easily push their ransomware to, potentially hundreds or thousands of organizations versus, all right, we got into this one, now we're going to lock them up. And I think we also potentially saw issues on their side where they compromised too many people at once, and were potentially, not able to scale to actually supply decryptors to all of the people that they compromised. And, we saw them go dark, and now we're seeing a new group emerging, dark matter. And there's a lot of discussion right now among threat researchers whether or not this is REvil resurfacing. And there are a lot of indications that it might be.
Is it, you said 0-day, which is really depressing, but is it really about making sure that you're patching? I mean, what are some of the first things that people need to think about for this?
So there are 5 things that people really should do organizationally and personally. The first is they should have good backups. That's something we've been saying forever. That's actually one of the things attackers recognize, and that's why they started doing double extortion, where they're exfiltrating sensitive data before they're encrypting things, because organizations were being much better with backups. So when they were compromised by ransomware, they could just be like, whatever, pound sand, like, we don't need you. So the attackers recognized that and figured out another way to monetize their access. So backups are still key. Be careful about what you're clicking on. Don't click on links that look weird. Don't click on attachments that look weird. Take the extra 5-10 minutes to verify that this is legitimate. You know, if it's legitimate and it's actually related to an Amazon package being delayed or delivered, that will still be fine 5 to 10 minutes from now. You know, if it's not real, that's where you open yourself up to a lot of potential hurt, because now you've clicked on this, you didn't take, you know, a step back and take 5 minutes, and now you have a ransomware incident. Passwords are really, really, really important, not just for ransomware, but also for any sort of attacks. They are the number one way attackers look to get into organizations, is to either purchase or obtain legitimate credentials that they can then use. So having unique, strong passwords across all of your accounts and devices is really, really important. Just reusing one can open you up to a world of hurt if that's the same password for your banking account, if that's the same password you're using for your brokerage or your retirement funds, you know, anything like that. And that's something attackers want to get into. They also want your Netflix password and your Disney Plus password and all of those things. So all of those things are worth money on the dark web. So be careful that they're different and strong and unique per account. And then finally is what you were alluding to, Ashley, which is, you know, make sure your operating system is fully patched for whatever device you have. When updates come out, when patches come out, install them immediately to be protected. And also whatever antivirus software protections you're running, it's the same thing. You need to make sure that those are up to date every time something new comes out to be able to be effectively protected. And if people and organizations really adhere to at least those 5 core things, it would go pretty far, actually, to protecting them from not only ransomware, but also other types of attacks, especially when you're looking at the misuse of stolen credentials.
From a leadership point of view, there's sometimes, or I've heard people saying, well, what's the big deal at the end of the day? So yes, if it's such a big problem, then it can't really be our fault if it happens to us. I mean, yeah, maybe we could have done better, but really, what's the big deal? I mean, there must be a good counter to that from your point of view.
Yeah, it is your fault. If you're not taking steps to be protected, if you aren't even doing the basics where, you know, it's patching and being careful about passwords, then you're gonna get breached. You're probably going to get breached, honestly, by more than one group. You might be looking at ransomware with, you know, nation state, with just your regular hacktivists or people that, like, we call them kind of script kiddies, who just look for things that are vulnerable and, you know, see what they can do to mess with them. So this outdated idea of, well, if I just don't do anything, you know, plausible deniability, it's not the case anymore. You know, in society, and attackers recognize this when they moved into cyberspace, was people and organizations are incredibly reliant upon their computers and the internet. And unless you're planning on going totally off the grid and not having anything in today's society and in today's day and age, you have to have protections. You know, you have to understand what this looks like. Just like if you were traveling and you were going to a potentially dangerous country or an area where you had concerns, right? You would do your research, you would take steps to be safe, you would be careful. And this is the same kind of thing. It's part of your day now. You have to have an awareness of malicious emails, you know, malicious links, things like that, because that's the way we live now, realistically. It's a lot online. So we need to take steps to be safe there the same way we would take steps to be safe in reality, basically in real life.
So from a learning more point of view, you've kindly mentioned some good things that people can do, some hygiene that they can do. How do people go about it? What's the best way of educating themselves on these things, apart from listening to DevSecTalks, of course?
If you want to know more about ransomware itself and the different groups and how they operate, who they target, I would say check out our blog. It's unit42.paloaltonetworks.com. That's where we publish all of our threat research. And we have published extensively on a number of different ransomware families. So if you're our customer, you can go there to read about it and also get an idea of how you're protected. And if you're not our customer and you want to know more about what ransomware is doing and what the threat landscape looks like, you can educate yourself 100% and learn about, what the groups that are in the news are doing, how they're operating, the kind of ransoms they're asking, everything like that.
If somebody's listening to this and they go, this sounds really cool. I mean, and it does. I mean, let's be honest. It sounds really exciting. How do people get into being a threat researcher?
So there are a number of different paths, essentially. There's now courses you can actually take at colleges and certificates that you can get, which didn't exist when I initially started. I was one of those people that got into this kind of almost by accident. There's a lot of online training that you can find that's free. There are a number of resources and people that have published courses that you can do kind of at your own speed online. There's MIT as well has published free courses that you can look into. And then networking is really important. It's really important for a lot of fields. So if you're looking to get into it, I always suggest check around your local area. Is there a B-Sides that's there where you can start talking and networking with experts that way? Is there some sort of maker space or hacker collective? Those have become increasingly common, especially regionally, as people look to connect. Is there a local group that has meetups periodically? That's also something we're seeing an increasing amount of, and start talking to people. And if there's none of that, you can also go online. There's a pretty active InfoSec community on Twitter. There's a lot of people that are willing to help mentor there. You can look through LinkedIn and start trying to connect and message people. I have people do that with me as well, looking for guidance. A lot of people in the fields, we recognize that we need more people and we want more coworkers. So a lot of people are really open to trying to give advice or mentor, people looking to get into the field so that, we have coworkers that we want to work with coming up behind us. Just kind of, that's what you have to do, right?
A huge thank you to Jen Miller-Osborn for sitting down with me today. And thank you for tuning in to DevSecTalks. Don't forget to visit the link in the description below for details on this series, and subscribe and turn on those channel notifications to be the first to know about any of our upcoming episodes. Interested in being involved with DevSecTalks? Have any recommendations for future topics? Be sure to let us know in the comments section below. I'll see you next time.